Welcome to Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne. My name's Evan Green. I'm the firearms historian for the museum, and for the last 3 or 4 years I've been going through the museum's permanent collection of firearms, and as I encounter interesting firearms, particularly those with a connection to Wyoming history, taking advantage of this opportunity to share those firearms and to share those stories with you. And I think we have a great firearm and a great story for you today. This is a Colt single-action Army revolver. It is in caliber .32 Winchester centerfire, also known as the 3220. So 32 caliber revolver. And this may be one of my favorite firearms in the collection because of its condition and the wear on it. Somebody, and we know who, carried this firearm every day to accumulate this amount of wear. As it came from the factory, the frame and the hammer would have been color case hardened. The barrel and cylinder and backstrap would have been blued. There is none of that finish left, but there's also no corrosion, no rust. Somebody took really good care of this handgun. And you'll notice on the grips, these are gutta percha or hard rubber grips, and originally had checkering, and that checkering is all worn away from the firearm being carried in a holster and rubbing against the guy's coat or his shirt. Just wore all of the checkering off those grips. So, when the grips were pulled off, inside there was scratched the name Earl Haner, Cody, Wyoming. Well, who was Earl Haner? Earl owned a dude ranch between Cody, Wyoming, and the east entrance of Yellowstone Park. Kind of started out as an outfitter guiding hunting expeditions into the Bighorn Mountains, Apsaracas and other mountains in the area. And then eventually started up a dude ranch operation, which was fairly common in those days when lots of folks from the east were really interested in having a Wild West experience, and Earl Haner certainly had one of those. So let's shift gears for just a minute and talk about another Earl, a guy named Earl Durand. Earl Durand, his parents owned a farm near Powell, Wyoming, where Earl was raised, and he was an interesting guy. He was big. He was 6'2", 250 pounds. He would sometimes run 20 to 30 miles a day to keep himself in shape. He reportedly was an excellent shot with both handgun and rifle. He rode a horse from Powell all the way to Mexico and back, having some adventures along the way. In the summertime, he would spend almost all of his time in the mountains around Powell and Cody, so he knew that country like the back of his hand. He was also a really nice guy, reportedly, in that if a farmer was sick, Earl would show up and help with harvest or planting or milking the cows or taking care of the stock. If somebody was poor and out of groceries, Earl would share some of his stuff and often would kill an elk or a deer so that that family had meat to get through the winter. And possibly that good nature and willingness to help was what got into trouble, because in March of 1939, he was arrested for poaching 2 elk and was confined to the jail in Cody. And I suspect that Earl may have had something that was not quite right. Maybe he was claustrophobic. Maybe he had some other mental thing going on, because even in the winter, he would not live in his parents' house. He lived in a tent behind their house. So anyway, the jailer was taunting Earl about how, oh, you're not going to spend any more time in the mountains because you poached those elk and shot this guy's cow, and you're going to go to Rollins and they'll lock you up in a really small room and you won't be able to go to the mountains anymore. So That aroused Earl, so when the jailer brought in his supper, Earl grabbed the milk bottle, clobbered the jailer with it, took his firearms, and made him drive him to his parents' farm. So the jailer then returned back to Cody and alerted the authorities. So 2 law enforcement officers drove out to the Durand farm to arrest Earl. And this is only speculation, but Earl was so well known in the community as kind of an oddball, but at base a good guy. So I can see the 2 law enforcement officers going, oh, well, we better go pick up old Earl. God darn it, that guy clobbered the jailer. We better go get him. So when they drove into the yard at the Durand farm, Earl shot and killed them both. So then the drama took a fairly serious turn. Earl did retreat to the mountains, and a posse was organized to go look for him. And a guy named Millward Simpson, who went on to become a governor and senator of Wyoming, was an attorney in Cody, and he took partial lead in organizing the posse to go hunt for Earl Durand. And he specifically wanted people like Earl Haner, who knew the mountains, who was comfortable in the outdoors, who, would be valuable, knew firearms, knew the country. So Haner joined the posse. We have a great picture of him in a big old black hat, sitting on a rock with his binoculars looking for Earl Durand. But because he had killed these 2 law enforcement officers, the manhunt took on epic proportions. It involved the Montana National Guard, who had to get specific permission from the governor of Wyoming to participate in the manhunt. They had artillery from Fort D.A. Russell. They elicited the help of a pilot who was equipped with dynamite and tear gas bombs, so if they found Earl, they could drop this stuff on him. Well, Earl just was a little bit too smart for the group. They finally found him, and he was ensconced on a steep slope behind some rock walls. And 2 guys on the posse who had initially been told, no, we don't want you on the posse, but they came along anyway. Simpson did not want them on the posse because they had both been convicted of poaching. And they obviously were not too bright. They had heard that there was this huge cash reward for Earl Durand, dead or alive. So they went charging up the slope to take him into custody, and he shot and killed them both. So now we're up to 4 people who have died because of this event. The 5th person to die was a member of the posse who somehow managed to shoot himself in the leg with his own firearm. He lived through several amputations and eventually died. So now we're up to 5 people dead. So while the posse's up in the mountains looking for Earl, Earl has taken a bogus deputy's badge from one of the guys that he shot on that slope. He's off sitting along the road waiting for a ride. So a car comes along, he flags it down, says, hi, I'm with the posse, I need a ride. So when he gets in the car, he then reveals who he is, and he makes them drive him to Deaver, where he picks up a shipment he's been waiting for of 30-30 cartridges. He then goes to Powell and goes into the Powell Bank with the intention of robbing it. So he had a car waiting. He took allegedly $2,000 to $3,000 from the cash drawers at the bank. He has ammunition. He has funds. He has a getaway car. So what no one has ever been able to explain or really speculate about is why he then started shooting up the inside of the bank. It's not a bank anymore, but I talked to a guy who says you can still see the bullet holes on the inside of that building. So allegedly he shot off 20 to 30 rounds inside the bank, which might have involved reloading a firearm or two. So of course the community hears the shooting. They assume it's sort of a standard bank robbery by some gang because Earl Durand's up on the mountain, right? They're looking for him there. So in order to facilitate his getaway, which would have been easier had he not shot off all those rounds in the bank, Earl ties 3 of the bank employees together as a human shield and pushes them out the front door of the bank. So a helpful citizen who has not been identified by history assumed that, oh, there's the gang, and he shot and killed one of those, that teller that was in that, tied together with 2 other employees. So, of course, the guy goes down, the other guys fall, and at this point, across the street in a gas station is a 17-year-old kid named Tipton Cox. And he's basically playing hooky from school. And he goes to school in Powell, even though he lives closer to Cody, because he can be on the Powell football team. Anyway, Tipton Cox in the gas station, and for whatever reason, the gas station owner hands Tipton a Winchester Model 71 rifle and caliber .348. The kid knew Earl Durand and said that he didn't fire until Earl turned a rifle towards him and he thought Earl was going to shoot at him. So anyway, he shot Earl, and Earl managed to crawl back into the bank and died by suicide. So we're up to 7 people in 11 days. And if you're interested in knowing more about that particular incident, this is a really good book about it, and it is eyewitness reports from Tipton Cox, from Millward Simpson, from other people who were involved in that particular incident. March 1939 in Park County, Wyoming. So, great book and a really interesting story. Sad, you know, things could have turned out way differently and spared 7 lives. So we started talking about this Colt single-action Army revolver that belonged to Earl Haner, who was on the posse looking for Earl Durand. So if you got questions or comments, you can put them in the comment section down below, or you can call the museum. I'm not here every day, but they take messages for me, and I would be glad to, if you're interested, sit down in person to talk to you about guns or Wyoming history. So thanks for watching.